Hello everybody, this is Jordan from Serendipity OA, and in today's video I am going to do a bit of a deeper dive into how to analyze a Keepa chart. And this is more so specifically for the Canadian market. We know that there is a ton of information out there that shows how to read Keepa charts, but a lot of this is only relevant to the US side. I have found that the Canadian side is a lot different, and it's actually a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, to look at listings in Canada than it is for the US. So my hope is in this video I can give everybody some additional information and how to properly read a Amazon listing and to make better buying decisions in your business. So I have a couple examples here. So firstly, what I would like to mention is any sales estimator that you look at in Canada, so whether that be Seller Amp, Jungle Scout, Helium 10, whatever the case may be, I have found that no sales estimators are accurate whatsoever. Seller Amp tends to get the closest because they are jacked right into Keepa. But again, this is information I would take only with a grain of salt. Always make your decisions based on Keepa itself. Never make any of your decisions based on the estimated sales that you see on any sales estimator. So this first example that we have here, we have a mini 30-pack of Q-tip cotton swabs. And we can see over here that according to Seller Amp, this sells 9 per month. And if we look at the statistics tab on Keepa, it appears that it is very similar. So it says in the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see the drops 90-day average. It indicates that it drops about 10 times per month. However, with this one, this chart looks a little different than a lot of charts that you would normally see. And so with items like this, I would always like to dig a little bit deeper into them just to ensure that I am making more educated buying decisions. And we do this by heading over to the Data tab on Keepa, clicking on the Offers section, and then we can filter by Prime and include historical offers. And from this screen, we can actually see if FBA sellers are actively moving stock. So this can give us a better representation if items are actually moving for other FBA sellers. And so when we scroll down here, we can see that there's an FBA seller in stock over here. We can see what their price history was on this section over here. So we can see in this case for the seller problem solved, it looks like back on February 16th, they came in stock for the very first time and they had 4. And then it looks like they got an extra unit in stock. So Amazon probably just received an additional unit for them. So for this individual seller here, I do not see any indication that sales are actually happening. For this seller down here, we have Big Maple General Store. Similar scenario, it looks like they originally came into stock on January 18th and they had 4 in stock. And since then they have went down in stock by 1. So in this scenario, it appears that they may have sold about 1 unit in the past month or so here. And as we scroll down again, we see one other seller on this listing, and we can see that they currently have 5 in stock. They haven't sold any since, as far as we can see. So even though Keepa and Seller Amp estimates that this listing sells, 9 to 10 per month, I would actually disagree. In my analysis here, I would estimate that this particular listing at this very time only sells, 1 to maybe 2 units per month. Okay. Some additional things that you want to keep in mind when you are looking at the Data Offers tab here is you do not want to look at FBM stock when you're analyzing this here, because if you are looking at sellers that are FBM sellers, their stock can change at will. They can adjust their stock numbers however they want. So their stock numbers are not an accurate representation of sales that are actually occurring. Whereas we know with FBA sellers, if stock changes actually happen, that is an indication that something has occurred. And so it either means that a sale occurred for that stock, it means that the item has went into an FC transfer, or the seller has physically removed the stock from their inventory. And when we look at listings that have more data, which we will look at later on here, we can make better educated decisions on what's occurring based on what we can see in the overall big picture. Okay. So then also, if you want to just double check your work on a listing like this, what you can do also to help prove sales in Canada is to look at the feedback or the reviews in the Canadian market itself. So we can do that by scrolling down to the very bottom of the page, or we can hit the 194 ratings section up here, and that will take us down to the review section. And then we want to ensure that we're only looking at the reviews within Canada itself. So here, if this is connected to a US listing as well, we would see a section down here that would say reviews in other marketplaces, which typically includes the US. Sometimes it includes European markets as well. But in this case, it looks like it's only connected to a Canadian listing. So what I would do is I would click See All Reviews. I would sort by the most recent. And then we can see how recently we've had reviews on this listing. So we can see in this case that we have had one review in the last month. So we do see we do know that at least one sale has occurred probably in the last month or two. And this was on January 21st. But since then, we haven't seen any reviews since August of 2022. So when I'm looking at a listing, if I'm trying to prove sales via the review section, I would typically do this with variation listings that I cannot prove stock in the FBA stock counter. In general, one review would equal about 100 sales. Now, if you only see one review in total, that could be a fluke. So you have to, again, look at the overall big picture. So if you have, say, one review every single month, and that is very consistent, you can probably guesstimate that individual listing sells probably about 100 units per month on average in total. If you're only seeing one review every couple months, you can kind of do the math if it's consistent again, and you can make a fairly good guesstimate based on that information. If you only see one random review out of nowhere, that could be a fluke, and I wouldn't take that as solid information. Okay. So let's head into the second example that I have here. So this one, again, is not a variation listing. So we can more accurately get information from the Keepa chart itself. And in this case, we can see that Seller Amp says that it estimates that there's 20 sales happening per month. According to the Keepa Statistics, it says there's 19 drops per month on average. However, if we do look deeper into this listing, into the Offers tab here, and we filter by prime, and we can include historical offers, we can see in this scenario that Seller Amp and even Keepa's estimate for total drops does not always give us the full picture. So we can see in this case here, we have a few more sellers on this listing, and we do have some more activity that's happening. So we can tell that this is a listing that is actually selling. And so we can see this seller over here, they previously had 64 in stock, and then all of a sudden there was a big drop. So when we see big drops like this out of nowhere, I wouldn't always count those specifically as sales, because that is a little bit fishy that you sell that many unless it's a very high in demand item. So with this scenario, I would probably assume that this seller may have removed some stock, or maybe they are a US seller on a Canadian listing. So maybe they are selling more in the US, and that would be also, if they are on the American listing, it would show on the Canadian listing as well. In this scenario here, we can see that this seller, it looks like they are consistently coming in and out of stock. But according to Keepa, they only pick up that they've sold about 2 in the last 30 days. So again, like, Keepa is not perfect. It doesn't give always super accurate information. It can only give you the information that it can see and chart. So in this scenario, I would actually guesstimate that this seller is selling more than 2 per 30 days, because it looks like back on, like, say, January 8th, they had 9 in stock. And then by January 24th, they had 2 in stock. So they probably sold 5 or 6 units in that time frame. Scrolling down here, we see some more activity. So again, this is just help feeding into our data. We're seeing more consistent data happening. We see that the seller stocks a bunch. It looks like their stock gradually goes down. So I'd actually assume in this scenario that this seller is actually moving these units. I would assume that these sales are actually occurring. If we've seen a scenario like this where, say, the seller came in stock, like right here, and then they immediately went out of stock, and then came back in stock for a bunch of units, a day or a few days later, that would be an indication that an FC transfer most likely occurred. So I would not specifically count those as sales. But in this scenario, we can see that this seller had 37 units in stock on February 3rd. and today, February 21st, February 22nd, they have 10 units in stock. So that would give me an indication that they have likely sold probably about 17 units in that time frame. Okay, so with all that information here, I would estimate that this listing is most likely selling probably between 30 to 50 units per month at the moment. And again, if we just look at sales estimators like via SellerAmp or via Keepa, that does not give us the full picture. It does not give us all the information that is available to us. So if we just look at things like this, we cannot really make educated buying decisions, or we may pass on something that may looks like it's not viable, but it is actually pretty viable if we dig a little bit deeper. Okay, and so the last example that I have here for today is a listing that is a variation listing. So when a listing is a variation, that means that there are multiple different products, models, or colors, etc., all under a single parent listing. So all these individual listings would be considered child ASINs or child listings, and then the overall listing itself would be considered the parent listing. We can also identify that if you are using SellerAmp, it does come up with an alert over here indicating a V for variation. And so again, when we look at something like this, the Keepa chart that we see is shared between all of the variations. Even if we switch from different variation to different variation and the chart looks different, we can see that for each variation that we look at, the sales rank will be exactly the same. So we cannot depend on the Keepa chart itself to give us accurate data when we are looking at items that are variation listings. For things that are variations, I would say it is a requirement that you have to dig deeper into the data tab and or into the review section in order to make smart buying decisions. So in this case, let's take a deeper dive into this guy. So we're looking at the black variation, and we can see here that according to SellerAmp, it gives you an indication that it's selling 28 units per month. They give you a it says estimated sales are shared across all variations, just like I mentioned. They never used to have that. That is a relatively new feature, I believe. Looking at Keepa, according to their stats, it's selling 30 units per month on average. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this guy and take a look. So we can dig into the prime section here, click include historical offers. And we can see that there are sales that are occurring, but again, we do not always get the big picture when we look at SellerAmp or Keepa. In this case, they may be a little bit more accurate, but let's dig a little bit deeper and take a look. So we can see in this case, for this seller over here, it looked like they had stocked 17 units, and then they dropped to about 13. So it looks like they've only sold a couple in the last couple months here. This seller over here, it looks like they stocked a couple, they sold a couple, they stocked some more, and they've been selling some more since. So for this individual seller here, say from the 10th to the 21st or so, it looks like they have maybe sold about 8 to 10 units. So they have sold 8 or 10 units in the last couple weeks here. This seller down here, it does look like they are, again, selling some units relatively consistently, nothing too crazy, but they are selling at least a couple units per month here. This seller back here, it does look like they were selling some units and they are now out of stock, so they haven't been selling since before Christmas. And that's all that we have for information here. But let's just double check these sellers here, because I have a feeling that some of these sellers may be US sellers. So we'll dig a little bit deeper and we'll see if we can discuss what I mentioned earlier here. So I'm seeing all these items are shipped from Canada, so it just says shipped from Amazon. It doesn't say shipped from out of the country, and potential duties or taxes may apply, like this one down here does. If a seller is in the US, is on the US listing, this is exactly what you would see down here. And in this case, I'm actually incorrect. So none of these FBA sellers on here are US sellers. If they are a US seller, that just means that they are using the NARF program, and that is allowing their inventory to be sold from the US warehouse into other countries like Canada and Mexico. And their stock that you see would be shared across all marketplaces. So you want to just make sure that you're mindful of that as well if you are looking at sellers that are US-based sellers, because if you are looking at their stock history here, it may look like they are selling units in Canada, but they may actually be selling those units in the US. And again, that's kind of when you want to back away, look at the overall big picture, make sure that the sales rank looks good, make sure that the Keepa chart looks good, make sure that you have indications in the reviews that there are actual units that are being moved. So we'll come down here, we'll take a look. So this is a variation listing, so this is a great example. What I would do is I would come down here, I would click see all reviews underneath the Canada section. You do not want to see the reviews from other countries because that is irrelevant to us. So we click see all reviews underneath the Canada section. We would sort by most recent. And then in this scenario, we would also filter by the current variation that we're looking at. So we can do that by clicking this button over here. And then it always defaults to the current variation that we're looking at. So we look at the black variation. And this only shows us the reviews for the black variation. So we can see that there was a review recently in February. It looked like we had one back in November, and then it's been relatively inconsistent since then. So there are some reviews that are happening. It's nothing too crazy, but we can probably estimate based on the how sparse these reviews are. It's probably selling between 10 to maybe 30 to 40 units per month based on that information. Okay, and then just some last thoughts for Keepa as well, because I know I've had some conversations with a few people about this in the recent past. Some people like to look into the variations section here on Keepa to evaluate a listing. Again, in Canada, this is not something that I would recommend because the information that you are gathering through the variation listing, it could be shared across multiple marketplaces because as of right now, Keepa does not distinguish from marketplace to marketplace. So you can get some information from here, but again, when you're looking at this variation tab and you look at the reviews and ratings section, you can see like in this case, it looks like this listing has 13,000 reviews, this one has 2,200, this one has 2,100. We know just by looking recently, the black variation does not have 13,000 reviews in Canada. That would be 13,000 reviews total in all marketplaces, and chances are most of those reviews are coming from the US. So you cannot make accurate, smart buying decisions by looking into this tab when we are working in the Canadian market. So again, those are just things that you have to make sure that you keep in mind. If you are looking at this information in Canada and you're making your buying decisions based on information that you see like this, you will likely be not making the best purchasing decisions and you could end up losing some money. Okay, so that covers a lot of basics when it comes to Keepa in the Canadian market. I hope that this video was helpful. Of course, if you have any questions, certainly let me know in the comments of this video. Or as always, you can join our ever-growing Discord community. You can ask some questions in there. I'm in there active quite often. There's tons and tons of other people in there that are super helpful as well. And if somebody has additional questions, if there are enough questions about any individual information, I could certainly make some follow-up videos to discuss those things a little bit more in detail. But until then, have yourselves a good day.